In the midst of Chicago's endless rush, there lived a young woman named Emily Rodriguez, a 28-year-old receptionist with shoulder-length dark brown hair and a warm smile she always tried to wear, even on the days when her heart felt unbearably tired. Her days were filled with ringing phones, scattered paperwork, and the sharp gaze of a boss who demanded perfection. Emily was just an ordinary woman, living the same routine day after day, struggling to keep her balance in a city that never seemed to sleep. But one morning, everything changed. As Emily rushed through her busy workday, an elegant elderly woman suddenly walked into the lobby, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around Emily, holding her tightly, crying out with desperate longing, as if Emily were a granddaughter who had finally come home. Her name was Margaret Whitmore, a grandmother who had lived in loneliness, waiting for her missing granddaughter to return after 3 long years. And that's where the confusion began, because Emily Rodriguez wasn't her granddaughter at all. But in that embrace, Emily felt something she had never known before, a sense of belonging. One small lie spoken that day would lead them on a journey of love, loss, and second chances.
Emily Rodriguez was having the worst Monday of her life, and it wasn't even noon yet. First, her apartment's hot water had died sometime during the night, forcing her into the fastest cold shower in recorded history. Then, the train had broken down 3 stops from downtown, making her 20 minutes late to Hartwell and Associates. Now, as she frantically wiped down the reception desk for the 3rd time that morning, Mr. Hartwell kept shooting her disapproving looks every time he passed through the marble lobby. She was just reaching for the phone to answer what felt like the 100th call of the day when the crying started. Not quiet sniffles or polite tears, but full-bodied, shoulder-shaking sobs that echoed through the expensive lobby like a wounded animal's wail. The sound was so raw, so desperate, that every conversation in the vicinity stopped mid-sentence. Emily looked up to see an elegant elderly woman in a cream-colored coat stumbling through the glass doors, the mascara streaming down her cheeks, arms outstretched like she was reaching for salvation itself. "Emily!" the woman cried, her voice breaking on the name. "Oh God, Emily, you came back!" Before she could react, the woman had wrapped her in a fierce embrace, her expensive perfume mixing with the salt of tears. Emily stood frozen, her arms awkwardly hanging at her sides as this stranger held her like she was returning from war. "I knew you'd come back to me. I prayed every night. 3 years, darling. 3 long years." Emily's mind raced. This was clearly a case of mistaken identity, but the woman was crying so hard, trembling in her arms like a leaf. Over the woman's shoulder, Emily could see her coworkers in the law firm's lobby, pretending not to stare, while obviously fascinated by the dramatic scene unfolding at the reception desk. "Ma'am," Emily began gently, trying to pull back, "I think there might be some confusion." "Don't you ma'am me, young lady," the woman said, finally stepping back, but keeping her hands firmly on Emily's shoulders. Her eyes were bright blue, rimmed with tears, and there was something so desperately hopeful in them that Emily felt her heart crack a little. Emily hesitated. Behind the reception desk, her phone was buzzing with calls she needed to answer. Mr. Hartwell would be expecting his messages. But this woman, this grandmother, was still holding on to her like she might disappear. "You got so thin. I told you that modeling career was no good for you. Come, let's go get some lunch. I made reservations at that little French place you used to love." Emily knew she should explain. She should gently but firmly tell this confused woman that she had the wrong person, help her figure out how to find her real granddaughter, maybe call someone for her. It was the right thing to do. Instead, she heard herself saying, just give me a moment to tell my boss I'm taking lunch." The smile that broke across the woman's face was radiant. It could have powered the entire building. "Of course, darling. I'll wait right here. Take all the time you need." Emily walked over to Mr. Hartwell's office in a daze. She knocked on the heavy oak door and poked her head in. "Mr. Hartwell, my grandmother is here. She's not well, and I was wondering if I could take an extended lunch to get her situated." George Hartwell, a man who rarely looked up from his documents, glanced at her with mild interest. "Family emergency?" "Something like that." "Take the afternoon if you need it. Henderson can cover the phones." As Emily gathered her purse, her mind was spinning. What was she doing? She was about to go on lunch with a complete stranger who thought she was someone else. It was crazy. It was dishonest. It was Ready, sweetheart? The woman had linked her arm through Emily's with the familiarity of decades. It was too late to back out now. The restaurant indeed was small and French, the kind of place where the waiters knew your name and your usual order. The maitre d' greeted the woman warmly. "Mrs. Whitmore, how wonderful to see you, and this must be Emily. We've heard so much about you." Emily's stomach dropped. Mrs. Whitmore. Now she had a name for her accidental grandmother. They were seated at a corner table with a view of the Chicago River. Mrs. Whitmore, she really needed to ask for her first name, ordered for both of them without consulting the menu. The usual for me, and bring Emily the duck confit. She's always loved it here. Emily nodded weakly. She'd never had duck confit in her life. "So," Mrs. Whitmore said, once the waiter had left, reaching across the table to take Emily's hands. "Tell me everything. Where have you been? Your mother said you were in Europe, but then she stopped taking my calls entirely. I tried calling you, but your number was disconnected." Emily's mouth felt dry. The woman's hands were soft but firm, wearing several expensive rings. On her watch was a price that probably cost more than Emily made in a month. It's complicated," Emily managed. "It's always with family, isn't it?" Mrs. Whitmore's smile was sad. "Your mother never forgave me for how I handled your father's death. I know I made mistakes, darling. I said things, terrible things I regret every day." Emily squeezed the woman's hands, feeling the weight of a history she knew nothing about. "What kind of things?" "Oh, you don't need to hear all that old drama again. The important thing is you're here now. You came back." Tears started welling up in her eyes again. "I was so afraid I'd die before I could make things right with you." The food arrived, saving Emily from having to respond. The duck was actually delicious, though she barely tasted it. Mrs. Whitmore kept a steady stream of conversation, asking about Emily's life, her work, and whether she was happy. Emily found herself giving vague but truthful answers. Yes, she works downtown. No, she wasn't seeing anyone special. Yes, she was happy enough, though sometimes lonely. "Lonely," Mrs. Whitmore repeated, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "That's the worst feeling in the world, isn't it? I know something about that." Do you live alone?" "In that big house rattling around like a ghost. My grandfather and I bought it when your mother was born. 42 years I've lived there. Some days I think about selling it, but then I think, what if you came home? What if you needed a place to stay?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I suppose that sounds foolish."
"No," Emily said quietly. "It doesn't sound foolish at all." They talked for 2 hours. Mrs. Whitmore told stories about Emily's supposed childhood, vacations to Lake Michigan, birthday parties in the garden, piano lessons that ended in tears and tantrums. Emily found herself laughing at the right moments, asking follow-up questions, building on the fiction. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like lying. Instead, it felt like coming home. When they finally left the restaurant, Mrs. Whitmore hugged her goodbye with the same intensity as their first meeting. "Will I see you again soon?" she asked, and she could hear the fear in her voice, the fear that this was another disappearance, another 3 years of silence. "Yes," Emily heard herself say. "How about dinner Thursday? I could come to your house." The smile that lit up Mrs. Whitmore's face was worth whatever guilt Emily might feel later. "I'll cook," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Your favorite, pot roast with those little potatoes. 7 o'clock?" Emily nodded, still not sure what she was getting herself into. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her studio apartment. She looked up Margaret Whitmore online and found exactly what she'd expected. Obituaries for her husband, Richard Whitmore, a real estate developer who died 5 years earlier. Society page photos showing Margaret at charity events, always with a distant smile, and a few mentions of family drama involving their daughter, Catherine, and granddaughter, Emily. The real Emily Patterson, age 26, last known address in Portland. A few mugshots for drug possession. A GoFundMe page from 2 years ago asking for money for rehab. Emily Rodriguez closed her laptop feeling sick. She was impersonating someone's family member, someone who was clearly troubled and had broken her grandmother's heart. But then she remembered the way Margaret had looked at her in the restaurant, the way she'd talked about rattling around in that big house, waiting for someone who might never come home. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Margaret Whitmore's house was everything Emily had imagined and more.
A sprawling Tudor revival in Lincoln Park with a circular drive and gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Emily stood on the front step for a full minute before ringing the doorbell. Margaret answered wearing an apron over a silk blouse, her face flushed from cooking. "Right on time," she said, beaming. Come in, come in. I hope you're hungry." The interior was like stepping into a museum. Persian rugs, oil paintings, furniture that belonged in Architectural Digest. But it wasn't cold or untouchable. There were family photos everywhere. Books scattered on side tables, half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table. "Your grandfather always said this house was too big for 3 people, but I could never bear to downsize," Margaret said, leading her toward what Emily assumed was the dining room. "He said I was being sentimental." "Were you?" "Absolutely." Margaret's laugh was warm. "But sometimes sentiment is all we have." Dinner was an elaborate affair served on china that probably belonged in a museum. The pot roast was perfect, the conversation easy. Margaret asked about Emily's job, her interests, her dreams for the future. Normal grandmother questions that made my chest tight with longing. "I always regretted that we lost so much time," Margaret said over dessert, a chocolate cake that was clearly homemade. "Your mother and we both said things we couldn't take back. Pride is a terrible thing, Emily. It makes us hurt the people we love most." "What happened between you two?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in its saucer. "She blamed me for your father's drinking, said I drove him to it with my expectations, my disappointment in his career choices. Maybe she was right. I did want more for him than he wanted for himself." "And she cut you off completely?" "After the funeral, yes. Took you and moved to Portland. I tried to maintain contact, but..." Margaret shrugged. "You were 14, old enough to remember, but young enough to be influenced by your mother's anger. Eventually, you stopped returning my calls too." Emily felt like she was drowning in someone else's history. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for things that weren't your fault. You were a child caught in the middle of adult problems." Margaret reached across the table and patted her hand. "The important thing is, you're here now. We can make new memories." After dinner, Margaret insisted on giving her a tour of the house. It was like walking through a family museum. Photos of Emily Patterson at various ages, her school projects preserved in frames, report cards and art projects saved in scrapbooks. "You painted this when you were 8, Margaret said, stopping in front of a childish watercolor of a garden. "You said it was our backyard, but with purple roses instead of red ones, because purple was more magical." Emily stared at the painting, trying to imagine the child that had created it, trying to imagine growing up in this house with this loving, devoted grandmother. "You kept everything," she said softly. "Every Mother's Day card, every school photo, every little gift you made me." Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. "After you left, I used to come up here sometimes and just look at everything. Remember when you were small and thought I hung the moon?" They ended up in what had obviously been Emily Patterson's bedroom, preserved exactly as she'd left it. Band posters on the walls, books on the shelves, a teddy bear on the bed that had clearly been well loved. "I know it's silly to keep it like this," Margaret said, "but I always hoped..." Emily sat down on the bed, running her hands over the quilt. It was handmade, intricate, beautiful. "Did you make this?" "Your first Christmas with us. I started it when your mother told me she was pregnant, finished it right before you were born. It took me 9 months. Emily felt tears burning her eyes. This woman had spent 9 months hand-stitching a quilt for her granddaughter's birth, had saved every scrap of artwork and every school assignment, had kept a bedroom ready for 12 years just in case. And the real Emily Patterson was in Portland, struggling with addiction, not returning phone calls. "Margaret," Emily said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." Do you ever wonder if I'm different than you remember?" Margaret sat down beside her on the bed, considering the question seriously. People change, sweetheart. You've been through a lot. Lost your father, struggled with your mother's anger, lived on your own in a difficult world. I'd be surprised if you were exactly the same. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with anything, as long as you're here. Emily spent the next 2 hours looking through photo albums and listening to Margaret's stories. Stories about birthday parties and Christmas mornings, about scraped knees and bad report cards, about the little girl who used to climb into her grandmother's bed during thunderstorms. When she finally left, Margaret walked her to the door with obvious reluctance. "Same time next week?" she asked hopefully. "Actually," Emily said, surprising herself, "would you like to have lunch Saturday? There's a farmer's market in Lincoln Square. We could walk around, maybe get some fresh flowers for your garden." Margaret's face lit up like Christmas morning. "I would love that." Emily drove home in a daze. She was in too deep now, she knew that. What had started as a moment of kindness was becoming something bigger, more complicated. But she couldn't bring herself to regret it. That night, she dreamed about purple roses and handmade quilts. Saturday's farmer's market became a weekly tradition. Margaret would pick Emily up at her apartment. She'd been horrified by Emily's neighborhood, but tactfully hadn't said much beyond, "We'll need to find you somewhere safer, darling." And they'd spend the morning wandering among the stalls. Margaret had opinions about everything. The best tomatoes, never buy them if they're perfectly round. The proper way to select flowers. Bruised petals mean they've been handled too much. The art of negotiating with vendors. Compliment their display first, then ask for a discount. Emily absorbed it all like a sponge. She'd grown up without grandparents, with a mother who worked 2 jobs and had no time for farmers' markets or flower arranging. These small domestic lessons felt precious, worth memorizing. "Your grandfather proposed to me at a place just like this," Margaret said one Saturday, examining a display of sunflowers. 1968, right in front of a corn stand. Very romantic. She smiled at the memory. He said he wanted to start his proposal somewhere that smelled like growing things, like possibility. That's beautiful. He was a beautiful man. You would have loved him, Emily. He had this way of making everyone around him feel important, special. You get that from him, I think. What do you mean? The way you listen. Really listen. Most people are just waiting for their turn to talk, but you hear what people are saying underneath the words. Margaret selected a bouquet of sunflowers and handed them to Emily. "For your apartment. It needs more color."
Emily's apartment was indeed getting more colorful. Every week, Margaret sent her home with flowers, usually accompanied by a vase. "You can't put good flowers in a mason jar, darling." And often by food. "That freezer of yours is tragic. Take this casserole." Slowly, Emily's sterile studio was transforming into something warmer, more lived in. Margaret's influence was everywhere. In the actual books replacing Emily's e-reader, in the throw pillows that made her futon look less like a college dorm room, in the framed photos she'd started displaying. The photos were the hardest part. Margaret kept producing new ones, pictures of Emily Patterson at various ages that she wanted her granddaughter to have. Emily found herself studying them like homework, memorizing the face of the girl she was pretending to be. Emily Patterson had been beautiful. Long blonde hair, blue eyes like Margaret's, the kind of effortless prettiness that opened doors. She looked nothing like Emily Rodriguez, with her dark hair and brown eyes, and the careful way she carried herself, like she was always ready to apologize for taking up space. If Margaret noticed the discrepancy, she never mentioned it. 3 weeks into their Saturday tradition, Margaret brought up something that made Emily's blood run cold. "I've been thinking," she said over lunch at their new favorite cafe, "maybe we should have a family dinner. Invite your mother." Emily nearly choked on her soup. "My mother?" I know. There's a lot of bad blood between Catherine and me. But you're here now, and that changes everything. Maybe it's time to heal old wounds." Margaret's expression was hopeful, but nervous. "What do you think? Would you be willing to reach out to her?" Emily's mind raced.
She knew from her research that Catherine Patterson lived in Portland, that she'd cut contact with Margaret years ago. She also knew that Catherine would take one look at Emily and immediately know she wasn't her daughter. I don't think that's a good idea right now, Emily managed. We're still figuring things out, you and me. Maybe we should wait. Margaret's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Of course, I'm being impatient. It's just, I've missed so much time with both of you. I want to fix everything at once. Some things can't be rushed, Emily said gently, and Margaret smiled. When did you get so wise? That night, Emily lay awake thinking about Catherine Patterson. What kind of mother lets her troubled daughter disappear without trying to reconnect her with family who clearly loved her? What kind of person holds a grudge for 12 years? Then again, what kind of person impersonates someone's granddaughter for weeks on end? Emily had stopped trying to justify what she was doing. It had moved beyond kindness or confusion into something else entirely. She was living a life that didn't belong to her, accepting love meant for someone else. But Margaret was happy. For the first time in years, according to her stories, she had purpose. She was cooking again, gardening again, making plans for the future. Emily could see the change in her. She stood straighter, smiled more readily, had color in her cheeks. Surely that was worth something. The turning point came 6 weeks after their first meeting. Emily was working late, covering for a colleague who'd called in sick, when her phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. She typically called earlier in the evening. Emily? Margaret's voice sounded strange, shaky. Margaret, are you okay? I'm sorry to bother you at work, darling. I had a fall. Nothing serious, she added quickly as Emily sucked in a sharp breath. Just slipped on the bathroom floor, but I can't seem to get back up and I'm feeling a bit dizzy. Emily was already grabbing her purse. I'm coming over, right now. Have you called 911? Oh, no need for all that fuss. I'm sure I'll be fine in a few minutes. Margaret, listen to me. I'm calling an ambulance and I'll meet you at the hospital. Don't try to move until they get there, okay? Emily, really, I don't think... Promise me. There was a pause. All right, I promise. Emily called 911 from her car, giving them Margaret's address and explaining the situation. Then she called Margaret back to let her know help was on the way. You don't need to come to the hospital, Margaret protested, though she sounded relieved. I'm sure it's nothing. I'm your granddaughter, Emily said, and for a moment she almost believed it herself. Of course I'm coming. Northwestern Memorial was busy for a Wednesday night. Emily found Margaret in the emergency room, looking small and frail in a hospital gown, her silver hair muscled from the fall. There you are, Margaret said, her face lighting up despite the circumstances. I told them my granddaughter was coming. Emily took her hand, noting the way Margaret's fingers trembled slightly. How are you feeling? Foolish, mostly. All this fuss over a little slip. The doctor, a tired-looking woman about Emily's age, appeared with a clipboard. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Chen. Good news, no broken bones, no concussion, but your blood pressure is elevated, and you seem a bit dehydrated. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation. Is that really necessary? Margaret asked. At your age, it's better to be cautious. Falls can sometimes indicate underlying issues we need to rule out. Dr. Chen turned to Emily. Are you family? Her granddaughter, Emily said automatically. Good. She'll need someone to check on her regularly once she goes home. Do you live nearby? Emily nodded, acutely aware of Margaret squeezing her hand. They moved Margaret to a private room around midnight. Emily settled into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, planning to stay until morning. You should go home, Margaret said. Get some sleep. You have work tomorrow. I'm not leaving you here alone. Margaret leaned forward and took both of her hands. When I was growing up, my mother worked nights a lot. I spent a lot of time in hospitals and emergency rooms waiting while she took care of other people's grandparents. I always wondered what it would be like to have someone worry about me the way those families worried about their loved ones. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm not leaving you alone. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the late-night hospital routine play out around them. Eventually, Margaret drifted off to sleep, but Emily stayed awake, thinking. She was thinking about the way Margaret had said, "my granddaughter," to the doctor, with such pride and certainty. She was thinking about the tremor in Margaret's hands and the fact that she lived alone in that big house. She was thinking about Emily Patterson, somewhere in Portland, unaware that her grandmother had spent the night in the hospital.
Most of all, she was thinking about the moment when Margaret had called her, scared and hurt and alone, and how naturally Emily had responded. How right it had felt to be the person Margaret called, to be the family that showed up. Around 6 a.m., Margaret woke up. "You stayed," she said, sounding surprised. "Of course I stayed. Your mother used to do that when you were little and got sick. Slept in the chair beside your bed, no matter how uncomfortable. I always thought that was love in its purest form. Showing up when someone needs you, even when it's inconvenient." Emily felt like crying. "Yeah, it is." Margaret was discharged that afternoon with instructions to take it easy and follow up with her regular doctor. Emily drove her home and spent the rest of the day making sure she was comfortable, fixing meals, organizing her medications, installing grab bars in the bathroom. "You don't have to fuss," Margaret protested, though she was clearly enjoying the attention. "It's not fussing, it's taking care of family." That night, as Emily was getting ready to leave, Margaret caught her hand. "Emily, I want you to know, these past few weeks have been the happiest I've had in years. Having you back in my life, having someone to cook for and worry about and plan with, it's given me purpose again." Emily's throat felt tight. "You've given me something too." "What's that?" Emily thought about her empty apartment, her solitary dinners, her weekends with nothing but Netflix and silence. A family. Margaret smiled, but there was something careful in her expression. "Emily, can I ask you something?" Emily's heart started racing. This was it. Margaret had figured it out. "Of course. Are you happy? Really happy? Not just content or getting by, but truly happy?" It wasn't what Emily had expected. What do you mean?" "You seem so careful sometimes, like you're afraid to take up too much space, ask for too much. I want to make sure you know that you deserve good things, sweetheart. You deserve to be cherished." Emily felt tears burning her eyes. "Margaret!" "I know I can't make up for the years we lost, but I want to try. I want to be the grandmother you deserve." "You already are," Emily whispered. That night, Emily made a decision. She was going to find Emily Patterson. It took 3 days of internet searching and several phone calls to Portland area rehab centers before she found her. Emily Patterson was currently in a program at Cedar Hills Recovery Center. According to the intake counselor Emily spoke with, she'd been there for 6 weeks and was doing well, but visitors had to be approved in advance. Emily spent another 2 days crafting the perfect email. "Dear Emily, you don't know me, but my name is Emily Rodriguez. I need to speak with you about your grandmother, Margaret Whitmore. It's urgent, and it concerns her health and well-being. I know this is unusual, but please trust me when I say this is important. I can be reached at this number anytime. Please call me, Emily Rodriguez." Emily Patterson called that same evening. "Who the hell are you and what do you want with my grandmother?" were the first words out of her mouth. Emily had practiced this conversation a dozen times, but she still felt unprepared. "It's complicated. Is there somewhere private we can talk?" "I'm in a rehab, lady. Everything here is private and supervised. Start talking." Emily took a deep breath. 6 weeks ago, your grandmother mistook me for you. She came into my office building crying, looking for her granddaughter, Emily. She was so upset, so heartbroken, that I didn't correct her." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Are you telling me," Emily Patterson finally said, her voice dangerously quiet, "that you've been pretending to be me for 6 weeks. Yes. Holy shit. You've been impersonating me to my own grandmother. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane. It sounds like fraud. It sounds like you're taking advantage of an old woman." Emily had expected anger, but the venom in Emily Patterson's voice still stung. "I'm not taking advantage of her. I'm not asking for money or trying to get into her will or anything like that. She was so lonely, and she thought I was you. So you decided to play house with my family. Your family that you haven't spoken to in 3 years?" That seemed to hit home. Emily Patterson was quiet for a long moment. "That's none of your business." "Isn't it? She's been waiting for you, Emily, every day. She kept your room exactly the way you left it. She made dinner reservations at restaurants you used to love, hoping you'd call. She spent 3 years thinking she failed you somehow." "She did fail me. How?" Another long pause. "Look, I don't have to explain my family history to some stranger who's been lying to my grandmother for weeks. I want you to stop right now, tell her the truth, and leave her alone." Emily felt panic rising in her chest. "Emily, please, just listen for a minute. She's been happy, really happy, for the first time in years, according to her. She's cooking again, gardening, making plans. She has purpose. Based on a lie. Based on having family who cares about her." "I care about her," Emily Patterson snapped, but there was something uncertain in her voice. "Do you? When's the last time you called her? Sent a card? Let her know you were alive?" "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me." Emily Patterson was quiet for so long that Emily wondered if she'd hung up. "She never approved of my father, thought he wasn't good enough for my mother. Made that very clear to everyone, including me. When he died, she said some things at the funeral about how maybe it was for the best since he was dragging the family down anyway." Emily winced. "That's terrible. My mother went ballistic, told Margaret she'd never want to see her again, that she was a cold, heartless bitch who cared more about appearances than people. They had a screaming fight right there in the funeral home. And you got caught in the middle. I was 14. I didn't know what to think. My dad was dead, my mom was falling apart, and my grandmother she was so controlled, so composed, like she was relieved." Emily Patterson's voice cracked slightly. "So when my mom said we were moving to Portland and cutting ties, I didn't argue." Emily felt her heart breaking for them all. For 14-year-old Emily Patterson, caught between grief and family loyalty, for Catherine, lashing out in her pain, and for Margaret, probably devastated by her own poor choice of words at the worst possible moment. "She regrets it," Emily said quietly. "What she said at the funeral. She told me it was the worst thing she's ever done." "She said that?" "She said she made terrible mistakes, that she says things she regrets every day. She blamed herself for your mother cutting contact." Emily Patterson was crying now. Emily could hear it in her voice. "I tried to hate her. It was easier than missing her."
But you couldn't. No, she was a good grandmother before. She taught me to bake, to garden, to stand up for myself. When I was little and scared of thunderstorms, she'd let me sleep in her bed and tell me stories about brave princesses who weren't afraid of anything. Emily thought about the bedroom Margaret had preserved, the photo albums, the handmade quilt. She loves you so much, Emily. She never stopped loving you. Then why didn't she try harder to reach me? She did. She called, she wrote, your mother returned the letters unopened, and when you got older, you stopped returning her calls. I was angry. You were hurt. There's a difference. They talked for another hour. Emily Patterson told her about the years after Portland, the acting out, the drugs, the slow spiral that had landed her in rehab. Emily Rodriguez told her about the farmers markets, the family dinners, the hospital vigil. She really kept my room the same? Emily Patterson asked. Everything. Your teddy bear is still on the bed. Mr. Buns. God, I loved that stupid bear. By the end of the call, they'd reached an understanding. Emily Patterson wasn't ready to contact Margaret directly. She wanted to finish her program first, make sure she was stable.
But she didn't want Emily Rodriguez to disappear from Margaret's life either. She needs family, and it sounds like you do too. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe there's room for both of us in her life. Maybe we both need a grandmother. But what happens when she finds out the truth? We'll figure it out together. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Emily Rodriguez continued her weekly routine with Margaret, but now it felt different, lighter somehow, knowing that the real Emily was alive and getting help, that she wanted to reconcile eventually. Margaret seemed to sense the change. "You seem different lately," she said during one of their Saturday market trips. "Happier, more settled." "Do I?" "More like the little girl I remember, less guarded." Margaret squeezed her arm. "I'm glad. You were holding yourself so carefully before, like you were afraid I might disappear." "Were you going to disappear?" "Never again," Margaret said firmly. "Whatever happens, wherever life takes you, you'll always have me, I promise." Emily believed her. 2 months later, Emily Patterson called again. "I graduate from the program next week. I've been thinking, maybe it's time." "Time for what?" "To come home, to see her, to tell her the truth about both of us." Emily's stomach clenched with anxiety. "Both of us?" "Emily, you've been part of her life for 4 months. You've taken care of her, made her happy, been the family she needed. That matters. That's real, even if it started with a lie. But when she finds out I'm not you, she'll be hurt, she'll be confused. But she loves you. I can hear it in everything you've told me about these past months. That love isn't going to disappear because your name is different." Emily wasn't convinced, but she agreed to meet Emily Patterson in Chicago the following weekend. They met at the coffee shop near Margaret's house. Emily Rodriguez recognized her from the photos, though she looked healthier now, more present. Emily Patterson was smaller than expected, with tired eyes but good posture, the bearing of someone who'd fought hard for her sobriety. "You look nothing like me," were Emily Patterson's first words. "I know. I've been wondering how she never noticed." Maybe she did notice. Maybe she just didn't care. They spent 3 hours planning what to say, how to handle Margaret's reaction, what would happen afterward. Emily Patterson wanted to rebuild her relationship with her grandmother, but slowly. Emily Rodriguez was welcome to stay in Margaret's life, as far as she was concerned. "She has room for both of us," Emily Patterson said. "She has room for everyone she loves." They decided to tell Margaret together the following Sunday at dinner. Sunday came too soon. Emily Rodriguez arrived at Margaret's house early, helping with the cooking and trying to calm her nerves. Margaret seemed excited about meeting Emily's friend. Emily had told her she was bringing someone special for dinner, someone from her past. "I'm so curious about this mysterious friend. You've been so secretive." She is important to me. I think you'll like her." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Emily's hands were shaking as she walked to the door, Margaret right behind her. Emily Patterson stood on the doorstep holding a bouquet of white roses. She looked nervous but determined, her blonde hair catching the porch light. Margaret froze. Emily Rodriguez watched as recognition dawned in Margaret's eyes, followed by confusion, then something that looked like hope mixed with fear. "Emily?" Margaret whispered, looking between the two women. I don't understand." Emily Patterson stepped forward. "Hi, Grandma." Margaret's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed onto the doorframe, her face going pale. "But you're..." And she looked at Emily Rodriguez with dawning realization. "Who are you?" Emily felt like she might be sick. "Margaret, please, let us explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you're not my granddaughter?" The pain in Margaret's voice was devastating. Emily had imagined this moment dozens of times, but she'd never anticipated the raw hurt in Margaret's eyes. "Can we come inside?" Emily Patterson asked gently. "Please, let us tell you everything." Margaret stepped back, still gripping the doorframe. They moved to the living room, Margaret sinking into her favorite chair while the two Emilys sat on the couch. "I don't know where to start," Margaret said, shaking. 4 months. 4 months you let me believe, you let me love you, thinking you were..." She turned to Emily Patterson. "And you've been alive this whole time, healthy. While I worried, I've been in rehab, getting clean, getting my life together." "Rehab." Margaret's voice is flat. "And you couldn't call,
couldn't let me know you were alive. I was angry. I've been angry for 12 years. About the funeral? About what you said about your father? Emily Patterson nodded, among other things. I've regretted those words every day since. Your father wasn't a bad man, Emily. He was troubled, but he loved you and your mother desperately. I was grieving too, and I said something unforgivable in my pain. I know that now. It took a lot of therapy to understand that people sometimes say terrible things when they're hurting.
Emily Rodriguez sat silently, feeling like an intruder in this family reconciliation. This was what should have happened months ago. The real Emily, the real grandmother, working through their pain together. But that still doesn't explain. Margaret turned to Emily Rodriguez. Who are you? Why did you do this? Emily Rodriguez took a shaky breath. My name is Emily Rodriguez. I'm a receptionist at Hartwell & Associates. 4 months ago, you came into our building looking for your granddaughter. You were so upset, so heartbroken, and when you hugged me and called me Emily, I couldn't bear to correct you. So you decided to impersonate my granddaughter? It was only supposed to be for a few minutes, just until you felt better. But then you invited me to lunch, and you were so happy, and I thought one meal couldn't hurt. One meal became 4 months. I know it was wrong. But Margaret, you were so lonely. You talked about rattling around in this big house, about having no one to cook for, no one to worry about. And Emily's voice broke. I've never had a family. My parents died when I was young. I have no siblings, no grandparents. When you looked at me like I was the most important person in the world, I couldn't give that up. Margaret was silent for a long moment, looking between them. You both lied to me, she finally said. Yes, Emily Patterson said. Yes, Emily Rodriguez agreed. Emily, Margaret said, looking at her granddaughter, you disappeared from my life for 3 years. No calls, no letters, no way to know if you were alive or dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Emily Patterson was crying now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I was sick and angry, and I thought you were better off without me. Better off without you? You're my granddaughter. You're part of my heart walking around outside my body. There is no better off without you. Margaret turned to Emily Rodriguez. And you let me cook your favorite meals, tell you stories about your childhood, plan a future together, all based on a lie. I know. Do you? Do you understand that I mourned my real granddaughter while loving a fake one? That I poured my heart out to a stranger? Emily Rodriguez felt tears streaming down her cheeks. I never meant for it to go so far. It felt so real. It was real, Emily Patterson said suddenly. Both women looked at her. Grandma, maybe she's not your biological granddaughter, but everything she's done for you these past 4 months, that was real. She took care of you when you fell, spent the night in the hospital, worried about you, made you happy. That wasn't fake, even if her name was. Margaret shook her head. I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know what was real and what was pretend. The love was real, Emily Rodriguez said quietly. Margaret, every moment we spent together, every conversation, every meal, I wasn't acting. I wasn't pretending to care about you. I became family to me, the only family I've ever really had. But you're not Emily. No, I'm not Emily Patterson. But I'm Emily Rodriguez, and I love you just as much. Margaret stood up abruptly. I need some air. I need to think. She walked out onto the back patio, leaving both Emilys in the living room. That went better than I expected, Emily Patterson said weakly. She hates me. She's confused and hurt. There's a difference. Emily Patterson looked toward the patio door. She loved my grandfather for 50 years. She doesn't give up on people easily.
They waited in silence for 20 minutes before Margaret came back inside. Her eyes were red, but she looked more composed. "I've made a decision," she said, sitting back down. "Emily?" She looked at her granddaughter. "I want you in my life. We have things to work through, hurt feelings to address, but you're my family, and I love you. I want to help you stay sober, help you build a good life. Will you let me?" Emily Patterson nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, God, yes, I've missed you so much." Margaret turned to Emily Rodriguez. "And you?" Emily's heart sank. This was it, the end of the most beautiful 4 months of her life. "I'm angry with you. Deeply, profoundly angry. You deceived me in a way that should be unforgettable." Emily nodded miserably. "But," Margaret said, her voice softer, "you also took care of me. You brought joy back into my life. You made me feel needed and loved and important again. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning. Margaret, I'm not saying I forgive you. Not yet. But I'm not saying goodbye either. You said I became family to you? Yes. Well, family doesn't abandon each other even when they're furious, even when they've been lied to." Margaret's smile was sad but genuine. "I suppose I have room in my heart for 2 Emilys." Emily Rodriguez started crying in earnest then. "Really?" "Really. But there are conditions. Anything. No more lies, ever, about anything. If you want to be part of this family, it has to be as yourself. Emily Rodriguez, receptionist, orphan, whatever your story is, not as someone you think I want you to be. I promise." Margaret looked between them. "And you two need to figure out how to be sisters, because that's what you are now, like it or not, family." Emily Patterson and Emily Rodriguez looked at each other uncertainly. "Sisters?" Emily Patterson said. "Sisters," Margaret confirmed. "Both my granddaughters in different ways. Both precious to me. Both responsible for taking care of each other and me." Over the following months, they did exactly that. Emily Patterson moved back to Chicago, into a halfway house initially, then eventually into an apartment near Margaret's. She got a job at a nonprofit helping other people in recovery, slowly rebuilding her life with Margaret's support. Emily Rodriguez kept her weekly dinners with Margaret, but now Emily Patterson joined them. It was awkward at first, 2 women who shared a name and a grandmother, but little else, trying to figure out how to be family. But gradually, it worked. Emily Patterson taught Emily Rodriguez about Margaret's history, about family traditions and inside jokes, and the right way to make Margaret's favorite cookies. Emily Rodriguez shared stories about her months with Margaret, about the conversations they'd had, the places they'd gone together. Margaret reveled in having both of them. She'd gone from a lonely woman rattling around in an empty house to the matriarch of a small but devoted family. Sunday dinners became sacred. Saturday market farmers markets became adventures for 3. Holidays became celebrations instead of endurance tests. "I still can't believe how this all started," Emily Patterson said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "You literally stole my identity. I borrowed it, and I gave it back. You gave it back with interest. She loves you more than she ever loved me." "That's not true." "It's okay. She loves me as a child, but she chose you as an adult. There's something beautiful about that." Margaret, in trying dishes at the sink, smiled at their bickering. "I love you both, exactly as much as you need to be loved. No more, no less."
"That's very diplomatic, Grandma," Emily Patterson said. "I've had practice." A year after that first mistaken meeting, Margaret threw a party. She called it a family anniversary, celebrating the day Emily Rodriguez had walked into her life, the day her family had started growing again. All of Margaret's friends came, curious about the 2 granddaughters they'd been hearing about. Emily Patterson and Emily Rodriguez took turns telling the story, laughing about the confusion, marveling at how far they'd all come. "It's like a fairy tale," one of Margaret's neighbors said. "Mistaken identity, family reunions, Happy endings. Better than a fairy tale, Margaret said, looking at both her granddaughters, because it's real. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, the three women sat on the back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and watching fireflies dance in the garden. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd corrected you that first day?" Emily Rodriguez asked. "If I'd told you right away that you had the wrong person?" Margaret considered this. "You would have gone back to your life, Emily would have stayed lost in Portland, and I would have continued being a lonely old woman. And instead, I got 2 granddaughters instead of 1, a family instead of memories, love instead of loneliness." Margaret raised her glass. "To mistaken identity. To found family," Emily Patterson added. "To second chances," Emily Rodriguez concluded. They clinked glasses as the sun set behind them, 3 women who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over anger, forgiveness over resentment, family over loneliness. Emily Rodriguez had walked into that law firm lobby 4 months ago, thinking she was nobody special, just another faceless employee in a big city living a small life. She'd had no idea that one moment of kindness, one decision not to correct a grieving woman's mistake, would change everything. But that's the thing about kindness, she'd learned. It doesn't always look like you expect it to. Sometimes it looks like letting a stranger hug you. Sometimes it looks like accepting love you haven't earned. Sometimes it looks like showing up when someone falls, staying when someone is sick, choosing family even when it's complicated. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it looks like finding out that love multiplies instead of divides. That there's always room for one more person at the table, one more story in the family history, one more heart in the circle of care. Emily Rodriguez had thought she was giving Margaret a gift by pretending to be her granddaughter. But the real gift, the one that changed everything, was Margaret's ability to love them both. To see that family isn't just about blood and history, but about choice and commitment and showing up for each other day after day, year after year. "I love you both," Margaret said, as they sat in comfortable silence watching the stars come out over Chicago. "We love you too, Grandma," both Emilys replied in unison, and then laughed at their synchronicity. And in that moment, surrounded by fireflies and laughter and the warm glow of belonging, Emily Rodriguez knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because of a mistaken identity, but because of the choice to love and be loved, to build a family from scratch, to believe that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. The wrong Emily had become exactly the right granddaughter. And that, she thought, was the most beautiful mistake anyone had ever made. The end.
Epilogue. Time moved forward with its steady, indifferent rhythm, and the years that followed the night of fireflies and quiet promises unfolded with surprising gentleness. What had once begun as a moment of confusion and mistaken identity grew into a bond that transformed 3 lonely lives into a family that was stronger than blood. Margaret Whitmore, who had once lived in the echoing silence of her vast Tudor home, now found herself surrounded by voices, footsteps, and the comforting chaos of shared life. The house that had long felt like a mausoleum to the past gradually became warm again, alive with the scent of cooking, the sound of laughter, and the hum of ordinary domesticity. For years, she had believed her role as a matriarch had ended with her husband's death and her granddaughter's disappearance.
But the unexpected arrival of two women, one granddaughter by blood, the other by fate, gave her back not only her sense of purpose, but also her identity as the heart of a family. The transformation was neither sudden nor simple. When the truth about Emily Rodriguez's identity came to light, Margaret felt the deep sting of betrayal. It was not easy to reconcile the months of love she had poured into a stranger with the realization that her real granddaughter had been elsewhere, fighting her own battles. Yet as time passed, Margaret came to understand the truth beneath the deception. Rodriguez had not acted out of malice or greed, but from a longing for connection, a need for belonging that mirrored Margaret's own. What began with dishonesty had evolved into the most genuine kind of devotion, the kind born not of duty, but of choice. Rodriguez herself grew into someone entirely different from the nervous receptionist Margaret first met. Her life had been small before, bound by routine and anonymity, but through Margaret and Patterson, she discovered her capacity for care, and with it, her purpose. She left behind the sterile marble lobby of the law firm to classrooms, night lectures, and finally the world of social work. It was not an easy path. Her self-doubt often returned, whispering that she was unworthy of the responsibility she had taken on. But the memory of sitting at Margaret's bedside during a night in the hospital reminded her that love and presence did not require perfection. They only required someone willing to show up. Through this work, Rodriguez began to understand herself not as an intruder in another family's story, but as the author of her own. She realized she did not need to borrow someone else's name to matter. She had her own story to tell, one that was richer because it included not only her resilience, but also the choice of others to keep her within their circle of love. Emily Patterson's journey was much harsher. Leaving rehab was not a triumphal ending, but the beginning of a long uphill battle. Temptation shadowed her at every turn, and shame sometimes returned like an unwelcome guest. Yet this time, she was not alone. With Margaret's steady love and Rodriguez's unwavering presence, she found herself held fast when she might otherwise have slipped away. She learned to see relapse not as the collapse of her worth, but as a stumble on a path she was determined to continue walking. In time, Patterson discovered strength in sharing her story. At a nonprofit dedicated to recovery, she began to mentor others, offering not just advice, but proof that healing was possible. In guiding them, she found healing for herself. The pain she once believed disqualified her for love now gave her a depth of empathy that could not be faked. Every life she touched reminded her that survival could grow into service, and wounds, when acknowledged, could become sources of light for others still in darkness.
Margaret, watching both Emilys grow, came to see them as branches of a tree that had once seemed broken but was now alive again, stretching upward together. Where she had once wandered her house alone, she now presided over family dinners, garden projects, and weekly rituals that stitched new memories over old wounds. Her dining room table became a place of communion rather than silence. Her garden blossomed with flowers chosen and planted together. Her once frozen house now carried the unmistakable warmth of a home. The second year after their reunion marked a turning point. Margaret began to write again, filling journals she had left empty for decades. She recorded memories of her late husband, the mistakes she had made with her daughter, the painful words spoken at her son-in-law's funeral that had haunted her for years. But most of all, she wrote about the unexpected gift of having two granddaughters. She realized that the story of her life would not be defined by regrets, but by the way love had returned in a form she never could have imagined. Each season brought its own milestones. Spring meant purple roses planted at Rodriguez's suggestion, a symbol of new beginnings. Summer brought festivals and street fairs, where Margaret allowed herself small indulgences, rediscovering the simple joys she had once dismissed. Autumn carried them to markets and harvest feasts, rituals of togetherness that made her house ring with laughter. And winter, once her loneliest season, became her favorite. Fire is glowing in the hearth, meals shared with the two young women who had changed everything, and holidays no longer endured but celebrated. There were still hardships. Patterson relapsed once, and the fear in Margaret's heart nearly broke her. But Patterson reached for help, and this time there were hands ready to hold her. Rodriguez, too, faced moments of despair, questioning whether she was strong enough for the career she had chosen. But together they learned that family does not guarantee an absence of pain, it promises companionship through it. Even Catherine, Margaret's estranged daughter, slowly found her way back into their circle.
Though bitterness lingered from the wounds of the past, the presence of both Emilys softened her. At first, her visits were hesitant, awkward, filled with silences that spoke of decades of hurt. But gradually she accepted that reconciliation did not require forgetting, only the willingness to try again. For Margaret, the sight of her daughter at her table, even tentatively, was another miracle she had never dared to hope for. As the years passed, Margaret grew older but not lonelier. She knew her time was finite, yet she felt peace in the knowledge that, when she was gone, she would leave behind not only possessions, but a bond between two women who had once been strangers. She had seen her family torn apart by anger and rebuilt by forgiveness. And in her final years, she had witnessed something few ever did, proof that love could be reborn from even the most unlikely mistakes. Every season after that seemed like a blessing extended. Spring held laughter in the garden. Summer meant trips to the lake where Margaret sat content, watching her granddaughter's silhouettes dance against the horizon. Autumn brought warm meals and quiet gratitude, and winter sealed their bond with nights around the fire where silence itself was a comfort rather than a wound. Margaret often thought back to that first afternoon in the law firm lobby, the day she mistook a stranger for her granddaughter and embraced her as if she had returned from the grave. At the time, it had seemed like madness, but looking back, Margaret saw it for what it really was, the first step towards miracle. That moment of misplaced certainty had given her not just one granddaughter returned, but another found. For Rodriguez, the lesson was clear. She did not need to borrow someone else's story to find love. For Patterson, it was proof that no matter how broken the past, healing was possible. For Margaret, it was the assurance that love multiplies when shared, that the heart has no limits. Their story was never perfect. It was messy, filled with lies, mistakes, relapses, tears, and disappointments. But its beauty lay in the fact that none of those things proved stronger than their choice to remain, to forgive, and to grow together. In the end, Margaret's legacy was not the house she lived in or the wealth she had preserved. Her legacy was the family she rebuilt, the love she gave, and the proof that even the wrong beginning could lead to the right ending. The story of the wrong Emily had become a testament to the right kind of love, the kind that survives imperfection, embraces truth, and opens its arms wide enough to include not just one granddaughter, but two. And so their lives continued, not as a fairy tale, but as something even more beautiful, because it was real.
If you enjoy videos like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.